Hey there guys, welcome to another episode of Train Terms Talk Show. This is your host GR Productions, and today we are talking about switchers. Now then, when I say switchers, I mean locomotives like this, right here. This GMTX unit right here is a switcher, indeed. It's smaller and it looks a little odd in shape. But these units, you see it in the yards a lot of the time, switching around cars. You know, they can switch around cars too, just like GP units as well. Well, mostly GP units and these units here called switchers will switch around. And today we're going to be going over all of the electromotive diesel switchers. I probably have forgotten some, but I tried my best. Nobody's perfect. And just a little note, gensets will not be included because gensets were made by NRE and not Emd. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so before we start talking about these engines, there are some designations that you need to know. So the first designation is S. The S designation, which stands for 600 horsepower. The N designation stands for 900 horsepower. And then there's also the C designation, which stands for cast frame locomotives, and later on became a W designation, which stands for welded frame locomotives. There are also some CAF switchers there that are called TRs, and there's variants of them too. The TR stands for transfer locomotives, and that's pretty much you need to know. That's kind of simple. It's kind of simple learning about these switchers. There are quite a bit of variants, but this shouldn't be too hard to learn at all. So let's get started. Here's a picture of a very, very old switcher, a vintage one. This is by the Delaware-Lackawanna Railroad here. This locomotive is just simply called Emd Pre-SC. This was built in 1935 with only 2 produced. The S meaning 600 horsepower and the C meant cast frame locomotive. This one was made in 1936 to 1939. Only a total of 43 of these were produced. This one is just called the Emd SC, a little bit different from the Pre-SC. And you already know what the SC stands for now. Then from 1937 all the way to 1939, the first welded cast frame locomotive was produced as well. And this thing had 900 horsepower this time instead of 600 horsepower. And this locomotive was simply called the NW1. The N meaning 900 horsepower, the W meaning welded cast frame, and the 1, I believe, is just the model number. Then, in 1939, another variant of the NW1 has arrived and was stopped being produced in 1949, with a total of 1,145 produced in that timeline. And this locomotive is just simply called the NW2, and once again, the 2 is just a model number, so. Now this one you can see a major difference in. It looks a little bit longer as well. Cab looks a little different, just lots of big differences on there. It does look kind of cool though. I mean, it is an odd duck, but I kind of like it. Anyway, here, this is called the Emd Nw3, which was produced from 1939 to 1942. Only 7 of these were produced, and I believe they were only made for the Great Northern Railroad. Right here is another similar variant of the Emd Nw3. This one was built from 1946 to 1947 with only 13 of these produced. And I think Great Northern also was the only railroad to have these too. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But this locomotive here, just simply called the Emd Nw5. Once again, the number at the end for each of these locomotives is just the model number, so that's all. Alrighty, now it's time to get to these engines right here. This engine almost looks like a slug. almost like a yard slug, you know. Well, this isn't a yard slug. It does look like one, though, just because it's like a switcher, but it's actually a switcher with no cab, also known as a B unit. B units are seen often a lot on GP units, like, you know, I think there's such thing as a GP9B. There's also such thing as a GP60B. These B units have also been put on Dash 7s as well. B23-7B, I think is one of them, but they're pretty rare. This is one of the transfer locomotives that I was talking about, the Emd TR1. The TR meaning transfer locomotives, and the 1 also just being a model number. And there's also 5 other variants of that. The TR2. And here's the TR3. And the TR4. The TR5. And the TR6. And then this thing was produced. 661 of these were produced from 1939 to 1953. This unit is just simply called the Emd Sw-900. The S meaning 600 horsepower, and the W meaning a wide cast frame. Or a welded cast frame. Sorry about that. Then there were other variants that came out, such as the SW7, the SW8, and finally the SW9. And this thing wasn't too popular. It was built in 1951, but hardly anywhere even produced. This is called the Emd DH1. There's also another variant called the DH2. The EH stands for diesel hydraulic, while the 2 is just like a model number. Alright, these are 2 Montana rail link switchers. And this kind of engine here is called the Emd Sw-900. Now the 900 is a model number, and it does not mean 900 horsepower, because the S is what the horsepower means. 600 horsepower, and then a welded cast frame, and the 900 is just model number. This was built in 1954 through 1969 with 371 produced. Then there was also a variant called the SW1000, 119 produced from 1966 to 1972. And there's also an Emd SW1001 from 1968 to 1986, with 230 of those produced. And the most popular one out of all of them, the Emd SW1200, from 1954 to 1966, with 1,056 produced. And then there's also another variant called the Emd SW1500 from 1966 to 1974, with 808 being produced. And then the final variant, the Emd SW1504, produced from 1973, with only 60 in existence. We already did talk about EMD's multi-purpose units in the previous episode, but just in case you guys haven't seen it yet, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it again for those of you who are like new or have not seen the previous episode. Anyway, what you're seeing now are 2 C&W switchers. These units are called Emd MP15 ACs. MP meaning multi-purpose, 15, 1,500 horsepower, DC, direct current traction. There's also an opposite version of that called the Emd MP15 AC, AC meaning alternating current traction. And then, a lot of MP15 units that Norfolk Southern had were rebuilt into something called an Emd MP15E, which the E is standing for enhanced. And then the one and only other locomotive with the tunnel motor equipped, as you heard in the previous episode, the Emd MP15T, in which the T just stands for tunnel motor. And then here is this odd duck right here. It is pretty odd, but I kind of like it, honestly. And it does look kind of good in CN paint. Well, this was built in 1958 through 1960 with 101 being produced. And I think Canadian National might have been the only railroad with these switchers. This is called the this is called the GMD1. Yeah. Pretty much. This is just called the GMD1. The GMD standing for General Motors Division, and the 1 just being a model number, I believe. And here's the final one for the day of this episode. This one looks pretty cool too. I really like this one. However though, good luck trying to find one of these, because only 2 of them were produced in 1960. Yes, only 2 of them. It's called the Emd RS 1325. The RS indicating road switcher, and 1325 indicating it has 1,325 horsepower. Alright, so, yeah, just ignore how it's pretty dark in here, but that's it for today's episode of Train Terms Talk Show. Oh yeah, I've also rearranged it around a little bit, but that is it for today's episode of Train Terms Talk Show. And I just pretty much summed up all of electromotive diesel switchers in a little over 10 minutes. I'm that cool. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. But thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. Help me get the 400. That would be pretty cool. Help me get the 400, guys. Anyway, that's it for today. Peace out.